Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Cambridgestocks podcast. Today, our guest is Abdoul Aziz, who currently works as a junior financial consultant at the African Development Bank. We're going to get to know his journey into getting into a development financial institution, such as the largest in Africa, the African Development Bank. Let's get it.
Hello, Aziz. Good to see you again.
Hey, hey, how are you,
Uh,
man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Surviving, pandemic. So we're still surviving, which is great.
If you could tell us a bit about yourself to kick off with, about where you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. So, as you know, I'm from West Africa, particularly from Senegal and Mauritania. Currently working at the African Development Bank that I just recently joined. It's only been 2 weeks, but I feel like it's been quite a journey because my experience has been in finance for the past 4 or 5 years. I started in commercial banking in Canada, so quite interesting already in terms of mapping all those places and countries. And as you know, started with commercial banking, worked also a little bit in investment banking, in consulting, before I decided to go back to school, where basically I completed a master's degree at Holt International Business School between London and Boston. So I was doing a dual degree, an MBA and Masters of
Mhm.
Finance, and graduated not too long ago, although it was right away during the pandemic. So that was quite challenging. So today I'm really happy to be talking about my experience and my journey in finance in general. And, having very happy to have you to have me on the podcast right now.
Great. Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to see where students end up just briefly after graduation. If we could talk through a little bit about your past experience. You mentioned you work in different fields. Do you think it's something that you were choosing, or it's like you were planning, or it was more of a transition? You realized that one job that you want to transition to the next one, and you want to try all these different things.
This is actually a very good question, man, because if you ask me back when I finished my bachelor degree and I was doing it at the time in Canada, I liked finance. So, but I guess I did not do my research properly at that time, or I was still exploring a lot. And that's why I touched on quite some things. So I started with commercial banking, and it was quite interesting. So I learned a lot about mutual funds and having to deal on a daily basis with clients, looking at certain types of inquiries, although they don't really teach you about mutual funds in school. And then I found myself fairly understanding that this is not what I was passionate about. And based on that, I had to basically have my own startup a little bit because I was very interested in education, but development overall in general, that was a great interest of mine. But money ran out quickly, unfortunately, as in a startup. And I decided to take an interest and pick in quite different areas, I would say, because I did an internship with a DFI first. So that's how
Mhm.
basically, if we transition to today where I'm working for a DFI, I started with an internship for a DFI, which was
Uh,
called the
uh,
African.
yeah, DFI. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just gonna ask if you can tell us, because I don't think everyone knows what DFI is.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's very specific actually in finance. A DFI is Development Finance Institution. So basically, in any institution in the finance world that we talk about, or market or system that we have, so we have all those banks that we know. We have the clients, we have the insurance, we have the central banks, and DFI basically are institutions that are there to promote the development of a world, of a place, of a continent. So they have a development impact as well as basically trying to make a profit at the same time, which is very important. And the shareholders are usually countries. So that is a completely different type of spectrum because your main objective is what we today we call impact investing. But most people don't know that this concept has been in existence basically since the 60s and the World Bank. So today, the biggest institution that we might know as DFIs are World Bank, IMF. Those are the two biggest ones. Then
Mhm.
you have, like I said, where I am currently, which is the African Development Bank, AFDB, but you also have the Asian Development Bank or also the Latin American Development Bank. And those ones, their role is to make sure that we have a viable financial system, but at the same time that we have great development outcomes. So you might wonder, yeah, how did you end up there? So I did an internship, not really knowing, but knowing that I had a passion for development because I come from Africa.
Mhm.
And and I studied abroad, and I've seen the difference in terms of development. Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah,
basically, if I want to run,
you can't unsee the difference.
I cannot unsee the difference. For instance, currently I'm still based in Boston, so when I want to go for a run, it's very easy for me. All the infrastructure is put in place. All I need to do is to have good shoes and put on my clothes. When I want to run in certain countries in Africa, there's no infrastructure in place, so there's no roads, and that's
Yeah.
when development financial institutions have to have an impact by making sure that those roads are created by working with the banks, the government, and also the different type of stakeholder we might have in place. So those are their roles.
So after the experience at your first DFI, you then what was your next
After
step?
my experience at the first DFI, I think I had a clear idea of what I wanted to do, which was basically be involved in development. And knowing that I was very interested in finance, I tried to put in a plan. I think that's when it really started for me, because in order to join them, unfortunately, you also have to have a certain level of education. Without a master's degree, unfortunately, you will not be hired. You might be the best candidate, but that's like the first requirement when you go on the World Bank website for
Yeah.
any job. Even before experience, they ask you, okay, you have to have a master's degree. And that's why I started putting a plan in place where I could get my master's degree. But also, obviously, you have to have experience, you have to have knowledge about the field. And that's when I decided, okay, let me have a plan where in 2 years' time, I will do my master's degree. But in the meantime, I will acquire some experience. So that's when I decided to join a consulting firm that was local in Senegal, working about basically helping clients into the growth strategy. And right after that, I decided to join an investment bank because, that's fancy, number one. And number two, the work ethic is crazy, where you basically have to help a client achieve their goals. And that was a very good experience. And that's what helped me do my master's and today be in the position that I am.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting. And yeah, you've tried a lot of things. Then you did the MBA, and then the Masters in Finance makes sense because you want to kind of go back to basics of where you worked.
Exactly. Because you always need, I think the MBA was obviously more important for me because I already had the skill set, let's say, to work in the finance system, because with my experience in consulting and investment banking, and even prior to that, I already had, let's say, the hard skill set. But it's always good to have the MBA, which gives you also the soft skills that you can use, and in order to move up in your career, but also try to deal with different type of stakeholders. So that's why I thought having an MBA was a wonderful idea for me.
Yeah, and it makes sense with the experience that you've had. Yeah, if we can talk about your experience of job search after the beginning of the pandemic. Spoken to a lot of people. Lots of people struggle. Majority struggles. Some people go back to studying. What was it like onboarding such a big organization? And were you applying for, like, was it really a fast process, or was it once they got back to you, it just all kicked off and you were hired?
Unfortunately, we're not going to pretend and say that the pandemic was make things easier for anybody. So obviously, I had a clear plan that I started even before starting my master's degree. I knew exactly what I wanted, and I was trying to get into a couple of DFIs. And I think I was in contention for several of those. But the pandemic obviously changed the entire spectrum. You just graduated and you feel a little bit hopeless somehow. So you start applying, you start reaching out at your contacts. In my case, I would say that it was not necessarily, the process in itself didn't take long. It took approximately 2 months for me from the moment I applied until I started the job. However, the process of me getting to apply was more complicated in the sense that I needed basically to build up different skills that the school doesn't necessarily give you, because the interview process is very challenging and the test that they give you is also challenging. It's about an essay about a development project, sometimes that you have no idea in infrastructure. So if you have done a master's of finance,
I was about to say, I presume that the case studies that we did helped you tackle that as well.
Exactly. So the case study that you will be doing, this is the best way to prepare, honestly, is to do a case study where basically you are not necessarily prepared already, but to get your mind thinking and going through on how would I tackle these issues when I'm in front of the interview. Because I remember one of the questions that they asked me during the interview that was point blank is, so today you're the president of this DFI. What are you going to do? What's your strategy for the African continent? And I'm like, well, I have several ideas. And I shared my ideas. And then he said, but go more, go more. And that lasted for 20 minutes. So it is
Yeah,
very
they
rough and challenging.
yeah, and I've experienced this technique myself. I think they do it in quite a lot of places where they want to make sure that you understand that you're capable of dealing with the problems that you're presented.
Exactly.
I had a similar experience actually myself in an interview for a capital markets role, which didn't turn out to be successful, but it taught me that there is going to be a point where the interviewer is going to ask a question about something that you shouldn't know the answer to, and they would just want to see your thought process.
Exactly. Because I think what a lot of people mistake, and most people think it's only about skills, that as long as I know all the terms, I know all my ratios, the interview will be easy, that they're going to ask you what are my strengths and weaknesses, and that's it.
Yeah,
And no, you got to have a framework in place for every type of question that people ask you. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people do. They might say, okay, I think I'm passionate, but how can you show me your passion? One of the questions that they asked me, and I said, I think I'm a resilient person. They said, okay, show me an example of your resilience. And during the pandemic, what I did is to sign up for a certificate, is to basically get a contract as an independent consultant, in which I was advising a firm that wanted to be established in a different country. So you
hmm
got to show your credentials. And that's why I think, for instance, you creating a podcast also shows that. And
in a
that's
way.
something a lot of people are not aware, that there's always something you can do. Sometimes it's not even necessarily about the experience you already have, but what you can bring at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, some really good points. I think resilience is probably one of the most important. I mean, on the other hand, you came into this with a plan.
Yeah,
And I think when you have already been working in a high intensity environment, you are capable of jumping back into the rhythm no matter what.
that's true.
A lot of people struggle with that, and a lot of people haven't had experience before doing the masters. What what role do you think it played, knowing exactly where you wanted to end up after the masters, knowing exactly why you needed the masters for what role? What role do you think it played in you being able to secure the position that you're in now?
A huge role. Let's not lie. And because without having a plan, yes, you will probably jump in different type of places until you have your feet on the ground. And that comes back actually to that question that you asked earlier. What's the difference? How do you make sure that you have a plan also? It's not easy to just wake up. At least for me, I think one of the difference makers to have a mentor, you know? And I think a lot of people like having a mentor in which they feel safe, that they
Your
can
mentor
ask.
has been your professor, if I'm not mistaken, Dalco, in a way.
No, no.
No?
I mean, professors are great. Let's not deny they definitely help, because I always ask for advice. But I think my main mentor remained my father personally, because
Mhm.
he was also working in finance. And I was the type of person that did not want to listen at first, but also my previous boss when I was in investment banking, because my boss in investment banking is the one that pushed me throughout this plan of me basically going back to school. He was very
Okay.
understanding. And he said, I will always have a place because I think you're a hardworking man and you know what you want. But let me guide you towards how you should achieve it. So every 3, 4 months, we would touch base on what would be the ultimate, decision that needs to be taken, even during the pandemic.
What would you say to someone who didn't have a connection or didn't have as much experience, to someone who's going into a master's degree in a business school, not entirely sure of what they want to do afterwards? What any advice for those people, and
I think I would
what would
say
you do differently if, let's say, you weren't sure if you wanted to move away from finance? What would you do differently?
that is an amazing question, Daniel. I think the number one is to talk to people. talk not to your friends, but talk to the people that are already working in the field, because you might have an idea of what it is like, but until you actually can pinpoint and say, okay, this is exactly what this person is doing on a daily basis, this is what they're working on. Because working for a DFI is very different than working, for instance, in an investment banking role. And it obviously, I had the experience, so that's why I knew. But without having the knowledge of what it is exactly that the person is doing, you might have the wrong perception and idea. So I think it's very important to talk to as much people as you can. I know today is very difficult to network, for instance, you know?
Yeah, it's I mean, I'm finding it difficult myself. I think it's because we're used to this environment of we have everything online over Zoom, and it becomes overwhelming to some people. And
It
I
is.
understand them. Like if you're a student who just graduated and you just spent a couple months networking before you landed a job in, let's say, the Big Four,
Yeah,
KPMG, for example, you're gonna get people reaching out to you at a really at a high rate because a lot of people are searching for for work.
definitely.
And considering that your interactions during the day are already online for the majority, probably 99%, uh, it's yeah, I don't see myself, let's say, wanting to respond to everyone. I don't see anyone wanting to respond to everyone. So I agree
And
with
it,
you
and it
that
is, and it is fair. It is fair. It's very difficult nowadays, but I do believe the best thing a person can do is to try to know as much. And like you mentioned, talk to people, listen to some podcasts. Let's shout out your podcast for it. I think it's very important what you're doing,
that's
and you're
fine.
not getting enough praise even from your own university. That's my personal opinion. And so definitely talk to people, try to read, listen as much as you can about the industry and what is going on, and try to do something about it, you know. Write an article maybe about something that you're very passionate about, you know, because you should have the passion. Without the passion, you will not be successful in it.
Yeah,
That is also,
you need some kind of motivation. Yeah.
you need to have the motivation to be there and to succeed in there. And if you cannot see yourself writing something about it, that should tell you a lot. Whether you
That's
have been marketing, in finance, if you can't write something about it, that should tell you a lot.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point because yeah, if you say you want to go into investment banking and you can't write an article about an M&A deal that you found interesting, then then it's probably not for you. If someone wants to go into a role in DFI in their home country upon graduation, or someone who just wants to transition from one career to another, what advice would you give them, and what materials would you recommend them to read?
Ooh. So the first rule is that
Besides talking to and networking, what you can do.
obviously, and I'm gonna divide this question into two. I'm gonna mainly refer to this question as someone that doesn't have that much experience, because
Mhm.
I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, how would you
Uh,
approach?
the process is extremely competitive in order to work for DFI. And therefore, what I always advise is to be working for a smaller type of company. If your goal is to go to a DFI, it's to be basically working for a consulting firm. I believe that if you start your career with a small consulting firm that actually dealing with impact, nowadays it's very simple to see even an NGO, actually NGOs where you have a finance role within that NGO, or a consulting firm where basically the role of the consulting firm is to have a positive outcome on the planet. And we see a lot of them, like the Rockefeller Foundation. But you need to have to start basically, first of all, with some form of experience for 2 years. That's what I say. I know
Mhm.
it's a long time, but it's worth it, because you have more than 1,000 people that usually apply. Because after that, you can show your credentials into, this is what I've done for this region. This is exactly how I've contributed to the development of that region. Because ultimately, what set up a part candidate is not necessarily the degree, I would say, where they've been to school. No, it's not necessarily the grades that they had either. It's mainly, what have you done? Have you created a project where you even, did you actually just volunteer simply? Well, you were able to collect, I don't know, 1 million signature within your hometown in order to build a school, for instance.
Yeah.
So having a mixture of your, obviously your education, but mixed with some form of experience, whether in either volunteering, in either your experience, where you can show that you have a true interest in development. That's what
Yeah,
I always say.
and it's impactful, like
Yeah, it
impactful
has to be.
experience. Yeah.
It has to be impactful, because otherwise it might not work out. And to be fair, applying for DFI, you'll probably get rejected the first time. I've been rejected 3 or 4 times in my lifetime applying for DFI.
From AFDB
AFDB once before,
once.
but I applied to several other also DFI, been rejected 3 or 4 times. You know,
Persistence.
you have to be persistent, unfortunately, in this life. And but every single time that I was rejected, I was trying to see, what can I do more? What can I do more? And leaving a good impression also with the person that is giving you the interview always help, because as long as you're giving a good impression, they'd be willing to introduce you to new people, in which you will prove yourself, and then you can come back and apply again. And I think that's the difference maker.
Okay, and as for the, I think we can round it up. As for the last question, any material that you would recommend in terms of reading, just for leisure, maybe something related to your role?
Funny enough, the books, I know you sent me those questions, but I think the books I've chosen have nothing to do necessarily with DFI. I just
That's
think they're
fine.
really great book in finance that anybody should read, but also people that are not in finance. So the first one for me is always, it might be a little bit cliche, and it's a book about Warren Buffett. It wasn't even written by him. I think it was written by his sister or something. I don't know if you read that one, The Interpretation of Financial Statements.
No, but
Okay.
I think I think Professor Sheena told us about that book.
It's possible, but because this book, it's a very simple book, by the way. It's not written by him, but it's about understanding what is value within a company. So basically mixing up strategy, competitive advantage with value. And I think in this day and age where the stock market is going wild and is unpredictable, understanding the
Highly.
fundamentals of values is very important. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I take advantage of the fact that the stock market is going wild. We all play that game, but it's very important to understand what value is, and I think that's what the book does. So I think for anybody, whether they're in finance or not, they should read it. The second one is the next two
So
ones.
can you remind of the name so I can put in the description? I'm gonna
It's a
put all.
long. Actually, I had to
Yeah.
write it because it's long. It's Warren Buffett and the Interpretation of Financial Statements.
Okay.
The search for the company with a durable competitive advantage. This is just one title, by the way.
Yeah,
So
I'll make sure to put it in the description.
So you can tell it's not meant for millennials to read it, but I think it's important for our generation to understand what value is. And the last two books I would recommend, which speaks more to people's character. Like I know we've been talking about resilience and persistence, which I think is more important than anything else right now, especially for people applying for job, because I know it's hard. So the second one is Principles by Ray Dalio.
Ray Dalio, yeah.
You know, a very simple book again, but
And I think there is a really good version in an audiobook, which I
there's an
listened to.
audiobook.
Yeah,
I think there's
on
also
Audible.
a cartoon book. There's also a cartoon about it now, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of content that Ray Dalio has released over the last, I don't know, let's say 5 years.
I mean, his marketing is on point, no denial, but I think it's also a very good book, and it's very simple to read. And the last one, and more importantly, especially dealing with everything going on, is by Stephen Covey, which is the the 7 Habit of Highly Effective People, which is just a masterpiece. You never seen that? You never read that book? I'm surprised.
No, but there's so many books about like 7 habits, 10 habits, 5 habits.
Oh no! Trust me. This is from a professor from Harvard in psychology. It doesn't deal with finance. But what the book gave me, especially I started it, I think just before the pandemic, is a clear mindset and vision to have. Because yeah, you can be passionate about something, but if you don't have a vision, but also if you are not constraining yourself or restraining and making sure that you're consistent with what you're doing on a daily basis, you might not be successful. Maybe you will be by not being structured. It's obviously possible. We've seen so many different cases on it every day. But that book gives you basically discipline And I think that is what is great. It's not meant, it's very simple to read. It's like a story of a father having his daughter crying in front of everybody and being upset and not understanding necessarily why he's upset, why his daughter is upset, and maybe the relationship that he can have and how to fix it, for instance. So you see the example that he takes are very simple, yet it teaches a lot about discipline. So I think it's an amazing book too.
The name is Seven
The
Seven Habits of
Highly Effective People,
by
Stephen Covey.
Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you at first when you said the number 7 and then you said Stephen Covey, I thought you said Stephen Cohen and point
Oh,
72.
no. But what about you? What's the list of books?
I can't pinpoint down, but I guess I can say my favorites.
Just give me one.
Swimming with the Sharks. I can't remember. It's by a Dutch journalist who went essentially undercover to the UK after the 2008 crisis. So it was around 2014, I think the book is from. I could be mistaken, but around that year. And he interviewed people behind the doors, so no names, no nothing. And he collected interviews with people in banking about the financial crisis of 2008 and these were really high level banking individuals, like in MD positions, manager director positions, and none of them are responsible for the 2008 crisis, but collectively they're all responsible. So that kind of opened my eyes on the world of finance and that usually behavior of people is a collective mass, and that translates into behavioral finance and all of those things. So that was interesting to me. And Flash Boys by Michael Lewis and Liar's Poker.
Yeah, that one is good. That one is good. But you see, the first book that you mentioned is about behavior at the end, and I think that's the last 2 books I gave you, because above everything, it's all about character. What do you bring, and how do you act on a day on what you want to do? And I think character is probably what ultimately any employer would want, is what kind of person are you and if you fit or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure, and I hope to have you back in the future.
Hopefully.
And seeing your development and the development in Africa and the impact that you guys are making.
Yeah, and I hope we can see each other very soon and not be on
the Zoom call.
I'm looking forward to the season 2 where people can hug.
Yeah, season
2. Handshake. All right, man. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for watching the episode so much. I hope you have enjoyed. Please do like, share, and subscribe if so. And I hope to see you guys at the next episode of the Cambridgestocks podcast.